Today's guest is Diarmuid Toma, experienced fraud practitioner and head of fraud at AtData, now a part of Experian, where he's leading a team using email intelligence to power modern digital identity. Diarmuid brings over 25 years of experience across financial services, telecoms, and emerging digital ecosystems. His work focuses on unlocking email as a foundational identity signal, one that anchors digital relationships, persists over time, and provides critical context for distinguishing trusted users from bad actors in increasingly AI-driven environments. In this episode, we explore the impact real-time email intelligence can have in transforming fraud detection. We also dive into the growing impact of AI on both fraudsters and defenders, the rise of agentic commerce, and why building a robust trust layer grounded in persistent identity signals is essential to scaling secure, low-friction digital experiences. Welcome to DataTalk. I'm Kathleen Peters, Chief Innovation Officer for Experian Identity and Fraud, and your host for the Fraud Frontlines podcast series. Today, I'm joined by Diarmuid Toma from AtData, a leader in email intelligence. AtData recently joined the Experian family via acquisition, and together we are strengthening Experian's identity and fraud capabilities with real-time email intelligence, one of the most powerful digital identity signals in the age of AI. Diarmuid, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. I've watched it many times myself, so it's kind of nice to be here in person.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm so glad that you're here. It's great to have you here on the show. It's very exciting, of course, to have you as a colleague and have you as part of Experian. So really delighted. So Diarmuid, obviously you're here. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your background and your role, especially as you've joined AtData and help build the capabilities there.
Oh yeah. Well, this year is a bit of a milestone for me. I'm 25 years in fraud prevention this year, so it's hard to believe, actually. It almost wasn't even a job when I started it as a job. But so yeah, I started in finance and I didn't like that much. So moved to fraud. I was in the very early days of Facebook and Merrill Lynch and anti-money laundering, and telecoms fraud. So kind of a little bit of everything throughout the years. But I suppose how I ended up here, funnily enough, is the head of fraud for TransUnion in their kind of fraud and I had signed the contract for AtData, or Tower Data as they were known there, and then just struck a chance. Really, was chatting with Tom, the CEO, and went from being a customer to being a head of fraud in AtData. So that was nearly 5 years ago now. So really, then taking there, because I knew how valuable the data was then, and because I'd used it for so many years, and I was like, this is one of the best things we've ever used. And so I was like, the chance to actually turn it into something new, turn it into something very focused and for fraud was too good to pass up. So that's largely what we were doing. I mean, for the last 2 years, we haven't stopped. We've been innovating on that product since like every year we have like our multiple features we've been developing and releasing it since we started. And yeah, the goal was to basically just own that market and be the best in terms of email intelligence, because they do own the market. Like they have the best email quality in terms of the volume they're producing and all that. Because they do, it allows them to do something unique. It allows them to build unique features that the industry has never seen before in scenarios that they've never seen before. So that was me. I mean, and I just geek out on that kind of stuff. So it was an easy decision.
No, it's wonderful. Well, and you were mentioning too, you're obviously a user of this data and even from AtData in the past. What is it as you're looking forward now too? You're deep into the richness that email can bring in terms of providing that really strong signal. As we're looking ahead into more AI driven interactions, even fraudsters being empowered by AI, what makes the email signals so valuable?
It should be obvious to most people, I guess, but is that email is a bit of an anchor from the very early days of your digital relationship. If you're a company or a seller or whatever, to that first interaction with that customer, it's most likely email. before you have a trusted device, before you have behavioral signals, before any of that, you have an email, right? So generally an account creation, you get an email sent in. And because you have that, it becomes a really strong anchor point for that digital identity. That's the first part of that, right? Because there's lots of things that are anchor points in terms of digital, but what makes email a little bit unique is that so people change addresses all the time,
Mhm.
right? I've had multiple addresses since I was in my 20s to now, and I've had multiple devices
Like
since
your
I was at a
physical home address, you mean, like,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yes, yeah, exactly. And then IPs, of course, they're like the wind; they change all the time. But I've had the same email since I was 16. And most of my accounts are registered, and I don't really want to change it because like there's so many accounts that I have that are registered with that email, so I'm not going to change it that much. And so
Right.
so not only is it your first kind of digital, and or we'll call it an anchor point in terms of your digital identity, it's also one of the most persistent because it doesn't really churn that much. A little bit, people do try different things, but generally they'll come back to the same email a lot of the
Yes,
time.
true.
So now to build everything around it, it allows you to gain a massive insight into both positive and negative. And I really try and stress that, right? This is not, we talk as fraud people, we talk about fraud prevention all the time, but as important to say we can prove somebody is good.
Yes.
In
You
fact, it's
can
more.
recognize them. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, because 95% of your client base is good. And remember that. There's fraud, but they're the minority. So we use a lot of the stuff we build, the features we build are for that, for positive kind of scoring to make sure that good people get recognized for their good behavior, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can recognize someone, you can actually put them through less friction and less step up if you know that it's very likely that they are good and
Yeah,
they are who they say they are.
exactly.
What do you think? It's an interesting aspect to me about email as well. I feel like if you were to ask someone, are you comfortable sharing your email? Many people are, maybe even more so than sharing their phone number, for example, their mobile phone number. Do you
True.
find that as well? Are people willing to
Oh,
share their email?
absolutely. And you'll notice even it's not a theory because you'll notice that well, it is a little regional. So in the Western, let's say Europe and US and Australia and so on, that is the default because they know that the population rates of, like, if they ask for phone, it'll be they won't give it, as you said, like it won't be as high. So but when you ask
Mhm.
for email, yeah, sure, here you go. Now, partly because people rely on spam filters and things like that, but they still give it to you and they still think it's part of the natural onboarding process. And it's being used more and more. Before it was just for signing up for Facebook or whatever, use some social, but now it's if you're signing up for a bank loan, your email's in there. If you're signing
Mhm.
up for it's just across the board, you know.
Well,
And
if I'm
like,
signing up for an account on ChatGPT or for Claude, it's
well,
going to ask for
exactly,
my
yeah,
email. Yeah.
yeah. So now it's prolific, in terms of its use and how it's used. But yeah, you're right. And now the only exception I would say is like places maybe in India and places like that in some parts of Africa where phone is dominant in terms of that. So you see a little bit in South America too, but they still have email. It's slight variance on the acceptability.
Right, right. So, dear Mid, with AtData, so AtData obviously goes beyond basic email checks. How does real time email intelligence help organizations or businesses detect fraud earlier, like such as ad account opening or onboarding, while they're still preserving this low friction experience for consumers who are visiting? And as you said, most consumers are legitimate. So,
Mhm.
how does AtData help with that?
I suppose before we go into like so we've lots of different features that we look at and we analyze in behavioral aspects, but I suppose it's our data strength is largely its size. We are the largest email network in the world, bar none. So we process billions of email signals every month globally. And when I say signals, what that means is that we see emails coming in and from our client base, like we have thousands of clients, and there's somebody's taking out a loan, someone's buying some sneakers, somebody's taking out a sweater, so we'll see the same email coming in multiple times a day. Okay, so
Yep. Yep.
what that is, and I always kind of say we're not a database, we're an environment.
What's the difference? Talk a little bit about that.
So a database is something you can buy. It's static, and that's what people think of. So you, okay, I buy that database and I put it here. An environment is something that's living, it's breathing, and it's evolving, and that's exactly what's happening. So all of those, that behavioral side, right, is live. It's happening as we see it, and it's evolving, right? And what that means is that, back to the trust side, we see these people, they're buying here, they're doing that, and that builds up a history, and that's a good history. So you say, okay, like mine, I do everything online, right? So I buy this and do, so clothes and whatever else. But so that builds up a massive trust signal, and that trust signal goes back, in that data's case, it goes back over 20 years.
Wow.
Of history with that, with those
Is
emails and that activity. So as we move into the likes of AI and the more advanced kind of capabilities of AI, that if from a fraudster's perspective, that they can create these profiles, these fake profiles, they can even age emails, but they can't replicate that. They can't replicate that massive history and that
history.
distinct profile behavior that we have, and it's very, very hard, in fact impossible, to recreate.
You're seeing those observations from all different sorts of use cases and different types of relying parties, whether that's merchants, financial institutions, restaurants. I mean, you're seeing all kinds of properties and different use cases where you're getting those observations from.
Exactly. And that's what you expect from a good behavior, because we don't just use our email to buy, clothes. We use it for everything now. So when we see all these industries, we see all that, that's a really strong identity, not just an email. It's a strong identity.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and then, but can they be spoofed, or can somebody compromise your email? Absolutely. So this is why we have additional, like there's only 30 fields in the actual, individual features that we output in the API itself. And they range from, like, okay, so yes, the email is this age. So, so it's, let's say, a year old. Okay, great.
Mhm.
Um, but how active is it? Okay, it's got this activity. It's maybe mid activity. Okay, so not really telling us much at this point. But then we start looking at the domain and looking, it's like, hold on, this domain it's not Gmail or Yahoo, it's something else. But the domain now is 6 months old. Well, that's a bit suspicious. Now we look at the domain a bit deeper and we start finding out that it's a spoof domain of, and maybe, and we see hundreds of these every day, but is like a spoof domain of a legitimate company. And it can be McDonald's, it can be Experian, it can be anything, and depending on we see it a lot in, like, B2B type lending fraud, where they'll pretend they are, say, whatever company. So, but also we look at disposable domains, and the weird thing is, what's changed in the last 5 years, or even, 5 to 10 years, is the domain has become disposable. So, like, we see
What do
what
you
we
mean by disposable domains?
so, like,
What,
a disposable email, I suppose, first off, is something that it's a temporary email. You use it to transact, and it's fluid, right? It doesn't exist in a couple of weeks later. So it's very bad from a merchant perspective, because you can't email them after that, and so it's important to know what is disposable, and we have real time models that can actually dissect that and understand if they are or not. But now, and they've been around for ages, those, like, Gorilla Mails and that kind of stuff. But
I see. Okay.
what's evolved is the domain itself has become disposable, in that we actually would see up to 10,000 unique domains a day being created, disposable ones. All right, so they spin
Is
out
there a
thousands.
legitimate use for that, or is that a very
Yeah, well, for
telltale
the
sign?
disposable ones, yeah, because privacy is the main reason
Oh,
people
okay.
would use them, right? Because but now
Sure.
with Hide My Apple, Hide My Email and things like that, less so. But yeah, that would be the legitimate use case. But I don't know what the ratio is, but it's heavily on the fraud side from our
Of
perspective
course.
anyway at the moment. But the domains are becoming disposable, so we see thousands of emails being spun up by these domains that only last about a week or two, and we see tens of thousands of those a day. So you can imagine the volume that we're dealing with, in terms of that. But we can identify them, and we kind of coined the phrase, these are called hyper disposable. So they only live for a very small time period. Um, but, like, that's just one, and then we look at, like, the location. We look at like, the proximity between where the customer is saying they are versus where they are on their IP, and there's just so much in terms of that. And we released a new suite of features, which is directly tied to AI, and what we're starting to see now in the emergence, and we call it the username trilogy, which is the tumbling, sequential, and gibberish. They're three different features, but they look at, and they're tied directly to what we see, the large scale attacks, right? So these are thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of emails generated in bulk, right, by
Mm.
script, by bot. And they have distinct profile patterns and stuff like that. And you can't, the unfortunate thing is our customers can't see it often because they might see Kathleen 101. And you're like, yeah, that's okay, isn't it?
Sure, sure.
And it
Yeah.
is okay, until if you're looking at it from our perspective and you see Kathleen 101, 102, 106, 105, one of that, and they were all created within minutes of each other. Now that context is massively different. And that's what we do. And that's what we give effectively to the market, is that we have this massive ability to see a very broad global view of email and email creation and activity.
That network effect is so
Hmm.
valuable to your point. It just opens the aperture on what's going on there so that you can recognize what would be obviously fraudulent behavior. Or to your point, the network effect can solidify, again, recognizing the good client, the good user as well, because you see the consistency and not this tumbling type of behavior.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, with regards to email intelligence, obviously, email, and as you've described, there's so much richness just in the email intelligence itself. But one of the reasons that we were excited to bring you inside of Experian is that we think it becomes even more exciting as you start to combine that with additional signals like behavioral analytics from NeuroID, with device data, with other consumer data. So when you think about email intelligence in combination with these things, what gets you excited there about the possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, like this is, there's never, I suppose, there's never a holy grail in terms of fraud prevention, right? But when you're starting, like you're taking an identity piece. Well, email isn't, yeah, like I think it's great, but it's not comprehensive, right? So you're taking an incredibly high value email piece with them, and as we said, an incredibly rich database and activity, and bring it into one of the largest identity graphs in the world in Experian, which is, they have like the expansive, and you bring that in and you allow it to interconnect with that, all that, the the context it brings to, and the ability that it brings to Experian is, I would say, it's unseen previously, because you're taking incredibly high value data and then bringing it over and saying, well, as in, I mean, data, I mean, the profile elements that surround it. And now you're bringing this database that has billions and billions of interactions, that activity network, and you're propagating it effectively into that. So it allows it to connect to that. The best way I can think of this is, or the way I kind of mentalize it is with graph network, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
graph
Sure.
identity networks. And so now all of a sudden you've got these, which were largely static identity elements. So SSN is a static element, an address is a static element. And now you're bringing in a context to it. You're bringing in,
Mm.
okay, so now I know how, maybe I know, okay, Dermot, he lives here. That's, and his SSN is here and his address is here. But now it's starting to see patterns and how they're maybe somebody shares an email and how they're connected. And I was like, okay, so that's a family member, that's this, and this is a grouping. And from a fraud perspective, obviously you see clusters of fraud, but also from a positive side. So it shifts the whole dynamic, in my view, of that database concept, and as I said, bringing it maybe more into that semi-environment context, or and enriching that PII data that we've known, and maybe even goes far to say, especially for a company like Experian, to take it from like into that, massively moving that their main base was, physical identity, knowing,
Yes.
for applying for loans and doing that, but bringing it into fully digital conversion, into moving that elements and converting it online, which is the way we're going anyway.
Hmm. Yeah, the freshness of the data and the repeat observations that you bring really enrich how we think about that data tied with more conventional, more static data, to your point. In your time at Data, you have built a brilliant team. You yourself have built this team of data scientists, and they have essentially made these signals available. How are you looking to what the team is going to be building going forward? Obviously, taking advantage of broader data capabilities, the graphs inside of Experian. But as you look and think about that team of data scientists,
What scares them for the future? What are you looking at in terms of new opportunities?
Well, right now we're trying to get our heads around Experian in terms of that, because the opportunity is not something we're lacking at the moment, right? Because it's huge. The ability to connect in with this country's database, this, this particular vertical, this, database. Um, and we fit in, we fit into all of them. That's the cool thing about email as well, is it applies. It can be in finance, it could be e-commerce, it can be whatever, and it fits in perfectly, So what scares them is that the team, they love everything they hear. It's just, okay, we need to focus on what's the most important, but
Prioritize.
prioritize. But like, we're trying to, I suppose, trying to keep a hold of that. And for me personally, it's the agentic side.
Great.
Agentic is a bit special. I like, again, I'm a fraud geek, so this is kind of me going out on it. But
Yes.
like, I think I've spoken about it a number of times, but it's what's interesting. And Experian, of course, have released the Trust Agent,
Yes.
which is, in my view, one of the first dedicated statements to saying this is what we're going to do, and it's so rare at the moment in agentic commerce. So,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things that's people overlook with, because it's largely people are afraid of it and how it's going to evolve and what's going to happen, and am
They're
I going to
afraid
be
of
here?
agentic commerce. They just don't trust. They're not sure how it's going to work. What's going to happen if something goes wrong?
Exactly. But
How
there's a
will I be taken
few.
care of if something goes wrong?
Exactly. And like, but there's a few fundamentals that people forget. Is like, okay, if let's go back to those sneakers I was buying earlier, right? Well, they're still getting shipped to my house.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if it's Agentic or me doing it, they're still
Right.
getting shipped.
Right.
And am I going to get a confirmation email saying that I've bought this thing? Probably. So where's that going? It's going to my email. Yeah. So,
True. True.
there's still a lot of fundamentals. I think, like, it can be overwhelming, and I certainly was when I first kind of started getting to grips with it. But there's a lot going to change. It probably is the biggest change since, it effectively is the industrial revolution for the internet, but there's stuff that there's going to stay. And I think, for a lot of people, focusing on that and focusing on the new evolving solutions is important.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah,
so
agent trust is a real breakthrough, I believe. It's so important. I think if people are going to trust, if agentic commerce is going to be able to take off at scale, consumers, shoppers need to trust, the merchants need to be able to trust, the card networks need to be able to trust. So much of that trust fundamentally has been rooted in being able to get back to the human, whether that's to confirm the purchase, whether it's to understand where it's going to be shipped to. If something does go wrong, what is the recourse? Knowing the human being who is behind that agent is so key. And I believe that's what's going to build trust to allow this
yeah,
to scale. And
yeah.
agentic commerce is one use case, right? Well, obviously, we can imagine so many other ones where agents are doing things on our behalf, both as consumers as well as employees inside of enterprises. Understanding that connection and being able to tie it back to verifiable identity information really feels critical to these things.
Yeah, 100%. It is, and it's scary, but it's impressive, and it's also, it brings huge amounts of opportunities as well. And I think,
Yes.
again, I largely, for me, I think it's just the unknown is the barrier at the moment. There's so much vagueness about what is it going to be. People aren't necessarily excited about it. They're wary of it because they're wary of the unknown. So this is why, one of the reasons, and not only is it a cool solution, but one of the reasons why I liked and this happened before, by the way, we were acquired, so I was impressed anyway. But why I was impressed with that Experian thing, because it was one of the first I've seen, is like, this is a statement. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yes. Yes. No, thank you for that. We're really, really excited about that opportunity too. And having AtData as part of that solution for sure. So we've talked about agents, we've talked about agentic commerce. AI in general, especially with the capabilities that generative AI and agents have brought, is empowering fraudsters as well. So they're able to do more compelling scams. They're able to produce these fraud attacks more at scale and in more automated ways. When we think about how email can be used in that context, in terms of scam detection, in terms of maybe even a greater volume that we may be seeing from these automated attacks? How should we think about some of the richness of signal there and where email in combination can really help to stop that fraud?
Kind of, yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier, because it's easy to say, to use a service and say, yeah, that email is valid. In fact, to do the fraud, the email had to be valid anyway. So that's not much of a signal, right? But
Right,
is there
right.
services out there that do it, and then you can do it if you're, if it's an AI bot or whatever, it's just going to be doing it at huge, huge volumes. So the key with not just for email but any fraud prevention solution is that it's insulated from certain influences. So one of the issues, with like, and I used to work for Facebook years and years ago, when they kind of started out, but the amount of fake accounts being created was prolific, it was huge, right? And so a lot of this, there's a lot of solutions out there is like, oh, but they have a social profile. And it's like, how hard do you think it is for the scripts and bots to create a social
Right,
profile?
exactly, exactly.
So it's to find solutions that are insulated, that are from that kind of and
Mm.
I'm not, and trying not to be biased here, but like, and one of the reasons I liked the AtData thing is that it's its own, it's completely secure database of activity, right? It's not really influenced by, social profiles or anything like that that are being created, and it's based off 20 years of proven activity. So
Yes.
even if you create 6,000 accounts and and I've seen them, they like socially they'll connect with each other and you age them a little bit and there's a bit of transactions and maybe even do a kind of a burst out where there's a little transaction and then a big one. But still, it's very hard to kind of prove out a long-term history like that. And they'll always, there's always signals from our perspective, there's always signals of interconnectivity and that kind of stuff. So the key to this is finding, again, not just email, but finding solutions that are insulated from that, that they can go, no, I still know, regardless if it's AI, if it's a script or whatever, I know if it's good or bad.
Hmm. Hmm. I like that point of view because you want to have the solution which is, like you said, insulated from this maybe spurious noise, which could take a view off target of being able to understand the effectiveness or the accurateness of that identity. But where you have that as a signal, that can be valuable as well, especially if you trust the source that it's come from and you see it there repeatedly in a positive light as well. How do you see email intelligence evolving then? Obviously, it's been here a long time. As you mentioned, we talk about 20 years of history that we can understand and observe. What's email going to evolve to? Is it going to persist or are people going to stop using email addresses?
At the moment, I don't see any signs of that. I mean, there's nuances of it, and we count for that too, like the hide my emails and things like that. But they're still a vast minority. But like I it's still at the moment, and again, I don't. There's no indication whatsoever that it will change anytime soon. Is that it is the hub of your digital entity, profile. So that's the from my point of view, the comforting part. But how it evolves in terms of its use is more about, so it was already a rich source. It just wasn't necessarily being capitalized on how rich it
Mhm.
was. So the evolution in the past few years is more about recognizing that. So in the past maybe 10 years, its complexity and how it's being used, how it's being understood, and how it's interacting with other profiles, both digital, non-digital, even. Um, that's where its evolution is. So as I say, changing email wasn't considered a behavioral signal. It's not. It was considered, is the email valid, was the first thing, and you're going, good,
Right,
let's move
right.
on. So it wasn't considered like that, but now it is more and more. It's okay. How active is the email? How many times do we see it every day? And where is it being used? How is it being used? Is it being used in a nefarious manner, or is it being used in certain industries, or is it all of a sudden jumped from being used in the US now in Nairobi or whatever? This kind of stuff. So that shifts the dynamic of what email is and
Mhm.
how it gets used. That's what's evolving. And then find, the kind of, for me, and particularly on this kind of we're on a bit of a precipice with Experian, because now, as I said earlier, there's a huge amount of different data sources where that can have gained new context, right? So, the as I said, the behavioral side, and moving that into that. So all of that is where we're gonna, I suppose, is the next gen for me. And you'll have to, we'll do this in 6 to 12 months, and I'll tell you, now this is what we
There we
did. But
go.
right now, I don't know. But
Yes, yes. It's interesting to me. I have teenagers, children that are teenagers. They aren't using email to communicate with each other. They're not sending emails to read. They're using it as an identifier and as almost a personal system of record, right? That's where the important information from the school is going to come. That's where the receipts from the stuff that they've bought online is going to appear. So I think of it as this sort of system of record, but in a way, too, it's also something that I feel consumers have, they feel they have some transparency and control over. So, for example, someone may have a couple different emails. They have the one that's associated with school or university. They have their personal email, or they may have one more email, which is just mainly for shopping. But the consumer feels empowered and that they have the ability to choose which email that they give. They can read or not read those emails. I think the way that we use them and the way that those emails personify who we are is, in a way, consumer empowering that will probably give it some longevity as well. This is a hypothesis of mine. What do you think about that?
well, actually, the funny thing you mentioned is that, like how your kids see it and how they use it, because I would say nearly half of our clients who use the service, they rarely, you don't hear the term email address anymore. It's email ID.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
that's a shift, because like
Yes.
email ID, so your email is part of your ID, certainly a part of your digital ID. And yeah, it's not a means of communication, to some degree, maybe for official stuff, maybe, but yeah, you're right. It's mostly for opening accounts and confirming your, because it's all, you have to remember, it's an authentication method as well, because
True.
for a new account, you authenticate your email, and you authenticate yourself,
Right.
and you send in all those documents probably via email in some cases. So that's what it is. It's just your official kind of part of that, and it's the cornerstone of your digital, that. And I think it's funny how it evolved. If we think about it over the 20, 30 years, we just accept it as that.
Yes.
And
True.
people are surprised that we use it as part of the, the digital identity.
But it's just become so embedded in such a persistent
Mhm.
part of who we are in our digital footprint. It seems only logical to be part of our digital ID as well.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So, dear Mid, what advice would you give to organizations that want to modernize? They want to get ready for this new type of fraud that's coming. They want to get ready for the new types of agentic traffic, good and bad, that will be coming to their business and to their websites and to their apps. How should these businesses think about their fraud strategies going forward? That can be email based or not, just in your experience as a fraud practitioner.
The first bit of advice has been the same for the past, 10, 15 years, whatever, is so many of the organizations, I see them trying to fix, a chargeback problem, or six, and they're trying to fix a symptom, not
Mm,
what the problem was. So the first thing has always been the same: start as early as you can, and I don't mean early as you can in fraud. I mean early as you can in the customer journey. So when that first interaction, that first point, when that you saw that potential customer or potential fraudster, that's where a lot of your focus should be, because the problem with a lot of companies across the board, different industries, it doesn't matter. At that point, they're obsessed with getting more and more customers in. So there's very
right.
little filtering about like quality or anything like that. So it's all about, just new acquisition of client base. So then it's left to the teams in fraud and so on to sort the mess out and decide. But the problem is that you're effectively polluting your database. So early as possible. That's the first thing, and use lightweight solutions like we have to filter that, and
Mhm.
as cheaply as possible.
Invisible signals, right? Start.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, if possible, yeah, invisible and cost effective, because that's important at this
True.
point. Um, so if you do that, most of your everything else becomes so much easier. But think in layers. You say it's not one solution. Email is not the solution. Device is not the solution. IP is not. It's a combination of that, trying
Absolutely.
to merge them and trying to get that good solutions, good orchestration engines that will merge that and do that. And then, real time context, of course, like what we do is, and what we've been talking about is the importance of what is this email right now, not what it was a year ago, not what it might be, in the future. It's that real time context is so important. And then before I get into the AI side, remember that 95% of your client base are good,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
prioritize them in terms of their um that making sure that they get to they get to their ultimate goal of paying you your salary and paying the bills,
Right.
right?
Right.
As easy as possible, and they can shop as one. But when it comes to AI, um, it's just making sure that, like, the tools that you're using are aligned with that, right? The scale of it is overwhelming. Like, for example, a lot of teams are still doing quite, it's surprising, like they're doing quite large volumes of manual review.
Hmm.
Well, the problem with that is that, so when you get a huge influx of orders, or actually what I've seen a lot of time is gradual increases, and they're thinking this is great, but it's a gradual increase to try and overwhelm. And then what a lot of businesses will do is just go, all right, fine, just let them through, and we'll hope that
Right.
the rate is
Sort it
that.
later. Hmm.
Yeah. So that's not obviously very scalable. Understanding, like, again, the tools that you have, can they identify that this type of behavior? Are they equipped to doing it if it happens? And it happens to us a lot, where customers will test with us, and there was no activity of bot or AI in that test, right? That's not to say in 6 months' time, when it does burst out, and it does burst out, that we can't deal with it then. So making sure that those companies you're using in whatever scenario can deal with that, and deal with it without, any massive, downtime or anything like that.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
naturally embedded, and they're naturally capable.
Right.
And as
So
I
look
said
for
earlier, insulated.
opportunities. Yeah. Exactly. So making sure they have a layered approach, making sure that they're ready for attacks that can scale a lot faster than they may have seen historically, correct? And
Yeah,
that they have the right knobs in terms of manual review or how they're doing that type of step up, perhaps.
exactly. Yeah. And data, it comes down to data quality. And I suppose one of the things people don't often have is good KPIs, right? Ensuring that you've got the measurements, the correct measurements, the precision, recall, false positive rate, false negative rates. You're measuring those, because that's ultimately your goal. You'll never, and you shouldn't try and, the goal isn't to remove fraud. You'll never do it, and you shouldn't do it, because if you remove all your fraud, your false
A
positive
lot of
rate has probably
friction.
gone through the roof, and you're
Yes.
probably removed. So, like, this is my little bugbear over the 25 years, is people fixing a, you know, 2% fraud problem by rejecting 10% of their client base. It's like, that's
Right.
not a
Right.
solution. It's cost you way more than the fraud originally would have cost.
It's a good point. So it's getting that balance right
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
constantly having the metrics so that you can review if you're on track or not and getting that
Yeah.
balance right.
Yeah. Early on, if ideally, before it goes too
Yes.
bad.
So I'll ask you one more question, a little bit different perspective. You've worked in email now for a long time. You understand the value of it. As consumers, any advice for consumers, for users of good email hygiene, or how we should think about how email is part of our digital identity and footprint?
Well, I think, like, respect it. Again, it's an asset. We all often, we live in this world where we try and build up points for credits and different things, and it could be coffee, it can be anything, right?
Loyalty, right? Yeah, all
Well,
these things.
exactly, yeah. So think of your email. We're moving into a massively connected world in terms of, the online activity, and yes, it's heavily interconnected. But if you're a good person, that's actually a benefit, right? Because what that means is my good activity goes in my favor. So I get, because I've been, I never defaulted on a loan, and I've never done refund fraud, and I've never done this. So therefore I get rewarded, because so I get maybe payment options that aren't available to everybody. I get fast tracked through these security checks that I didn't have to do, because I don't do anything. So it's an asset, and think of it that way, and keeping your identity stable and that kind of stuff is a good thing, in a large for a large part of your online experience.
Makes a lot of sense. Wonderful. Anything else, dear Mid, that you'd like to share with us, or we covered it all, do you think?
Well, we didn't cover it all, because I think we could probably spend another good few hours doing
I think
that.
we
But
could. I think we could, as we
yeah.
usually do.
So, but no, I mean, it's like this right now is just such an interesting time, because, as I said, like, we haven't been at such a fundamental shift in the industry, and I'm kind of just I'm watching and I'm learning and I'm being part of it, but it's just a really critical turning point in the industry. So it's going to be exciting, really, over the next 3-4 years. It's just going to be super exciting to see how this evolves and where we go with it. And then we'll do this again, and we'll look back on this conversation.
Absolutely. I agree. Thank you, dear Mid. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation. Really great conversation. I appreciate all of your insights, and I'm happy to be fighting fraud alongside you.
Me too.
I'll say that again. Yeah. Very happy to be fighting fraud alongside you. As fraud becomes more sophisticated and AI driven, it's clear that having trusted identity markers, trusted anchors of our digital identities, and real-time signals like email intelligence are really going to be essential for helping our clients to stay ahead of the next wave of fraud. So for our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about how Experian and AtData are strengthening identity and fraud prevention, be sure to check out the links below in our show notes. And as always, thank you for joining us on the Fraud Frontlines podcast. See you next time.